Okay, so this is a revision video on antidiuretic hormone. So this is slightly different in that I will give you a question on each slide. So for each slide, you just need to pause the video, answer the question, and then I will go through answers. So obviously we'll start with question 1. If you want to pause this, try the question, and then I'll take you through the answers. Okay, so on the diagram, label 1 is hypothalamus, and then 2, pituitary gland, and that's got a posterior anterior part. 3, these are osmoreceptor cells. They extend from the hypothalamus into the pituitary. And then 4 is antidiuretic hormone, that being secreted from the posterior pituitary into the blood, and its target organ is the kidney, specifically tissues in the kidney, and those specific targets are cells of the wall of the distal convoluted tubule and collecting duct. So let's move on to the flowchart. So sweating dehydration or increased solute concentration in the blood. This reduces the water potential of the blood. That increases water loss by osmosis from osmoreceptors. As a consequence, those osmoreceptor cells shrink. And then the hypothalamus produces ADH, and it's just worth knowing that that's also known as vasopressin, but you obviously learn it as ADH. And then ADH is actually secreted from the posterior pituitary into the blood. Okay, look, let's move on to question 2. So here we're going to focus on the effects of ADH at the target cells in the nephron. So I'm showing you a kidney here. We've focused in on part of the kidney, and that specific part is one of the nephrons. Remember, there are about 1 million nephrons per kidney, and so we're looking at one of those nephrons on the diagram, and then we're focusing on the walls of the distal convoluted tubule and collecting duct. So if we to zoom in and look at the cells of the walls of those structures, what I'd like to do is this: label the numbered structures. And so the numbered structures I'm going to label are 1, 2, 3, and 4. So what are they? Pause the video and do that. Okay, so 1, hopefully you identified as antidiuretic hormone. 2 is the ADH receptor found on the cell surface membrane. 3 is an aquaporin, so a protein channel that allows water to pass through. And then 4 is a vesicle containing aquaporins in its membrane. Okay, so let's look at exactly how these components function. So on to question 3. Okay, so there's 5 steps. I'd like you to identify what happens. So if you pause the video and have a go at that. Okay, so for 1, ADH binding to the cell surface membrane receptor. This activates second messengers, phosphorylase being an example. So step 3, vesicles with aquaporins in the membrane migrate to the cell surface membrane and fuse. And as a consequence, there's an increased number of aquaporins in the cell surface membrane. And so this increases permeability of the walls of the DCT and collecting duct to water. And then 5, the consequence is more water's reabsorbed and more concentrated urine is produced. And so question 4, if you read that and answer part A and B. So your answer to A should be water potential of the blood plasma is increased. You get less ADH secreted, less water reabsorbed because the permeability is reduced of the distal convoluted tubule and collecting duct, and then osmolarity of blood returns to optimum. And for part B, this is an example of negative feedback. And so finally, we'll move on to question 5. Okay, so pause the video and have a go at completing the flowchart, and then we'll go through answers. So you've drank a lot of fluid and that has diluted the blood, and so that would increase the water potential of the blood. You'd then get increased water gain by osmosis of the osmoreceptor cells, and then they would swell. That would lower the production of ADH by the hypothalamus, so less ADH is secreted from the posterior pituitary. So if you've got less ADH, a lower concentration of ADH in the blood, permeability of the walls of the distal convoluted tubule and collecting duct are reduced. You get less water reabsorbed, more of it stays in the filtrate and produces dilute urine, and then the osmolarity of the blood is able to return to optimum, to normal. Okay, so that is a revision video on ADH. Keep attempting the questions if you couldn't quite get all of those until you are getting them